Welcome again to Barker's Barbecue. Today we are looking to do a three-part series on brisket. Now, it's been a long time between videos and I thank you for your support while I've been away. This is one I've been really excited about doing, but I want to make sure I cover it in the appropriate level of detail. Thank you, birdies. Now, this is one I've been really excited to do, but I want to make sure I do it right because one thing I do get complimented on is the level of detail I go into in my videos, so I want to make sure I do right by you and give you the right information on this cut. First thing I want to say is a lot of newbies get really excited. They watch Barbecue Pitmasters and go, I want to do a brisket. Now, the brisket is one of the more challenging things to cook for American low and slow. What I would recommend is give beef short ribs a go first. Don't jump in feet first to brisket because there's a lot that can go wrong with a brisket. Getting beef ribs right first up can really help you nail brisket and help you sort of understand how the cook is supposed to go and how the beef behaves. So go check out my beef ribs video too and see what you think. So firstly, what is a brisket? So essentially a brisket is a pectoral muscle off the cow. It's made up of two separate muscles, the point muscle and the flat muscle, and they both cook differently, they interact differently, and basically this one here is what they call a packer cut brisket, which essentially means that the two muscles are still connected, they're in one piece. The flat runs along the bottom section here, and the point sits across the top. Sometimes the point will sort of roll over this edge, and you'll have a piece of it sort of over the back here. Perfectly fine, that's how it often works. Sometimes what a butcher may do is they may actually halve the brisket and sort of chop it in half across the middle and sell the top half and the bottom half, or what I should call is the point end section or the flat end section. If you've got that option, go with the point section because the point section has a beautiful load of fat inside of it and it will cook a lot better than just the flat alone, especially if it's early days and you're still letting the ropes. Now, briskets do come in all sorts of sizes, shapes and weights. I've cooked briskets down to sort of 3.5 kilos, all the way up to sort of 8 to 9 kilos. This one is 5.3 from the butcher. Real happy with that weight, a good sort of mid-range where I like to cook. So one of the first things I look at with brisket is the shape of it. Now you'll find, some briskets have a lot of thin tapering edges. So a nice thick flat muscle is really important. It's going to come up with a nicer product at the end. If you have a really thin flat muscle, it's going to be more liable to dry out. So the thicker the flat muscle is, the more heat it'll take and the more likely it is to retain its moisture throughout the cook. Most of the briskets I've cooked would actually come round to a bit of a like a rounded end here, or even sometimes a point. I saw this one and I quite like this one because it showed me just how thick the flat was, and I would normally sort of trim that off anyway or sort of taper it around, and this was already kind of pre-done, so I was quite happy with that. And it also gave me a window into a really important part, which is just how the marbling looks inside the brisket, which is another really big point of importance when you're choosing your brisket. So you'll have different types of meat, different grades of meat. Today, we've gone with a full-blood Wagyu 9+, which is your sort of royal top end of briskets. Spared no expense for you guys for this video. Really excited to see how this one comes out. So size for me, around 5 to 6 kilos. We've got that ticked off. The shape, I'm really happy with this one. Now, another thing that I do when I look for my briskets is once I've found one that I'm quite happy with the shape of, I've sort of whittled down the box that I'm looking at to a few that I like the shape of. I'll flip them over and you'll be able to look at the underside, which is the flat muscle essentially. Like the point might come up and sort of flap around the edge here, but I'm looking towards the thin end and I'm gonna come and show you what I mean. So looking at the underside here gives you a bit of a window into the fat content inside the brisket. So if you're seeing lots of white fat striations here, that is exactly what you want to see. So if I'm happy with the shape, size and the weight, and it's got a lot of really nice looking fat striations throughout the back there, I know I'm good to go. So another quick thing about storing your brisket. So if you're looking to hold on to it for a little while before you cook it and you don't want to freeze it, I would put it towards the bottom and the back of your fridge. Just keep it as cold as possible. In the vac seal bag, of course, just leave it as is. If you don't plan on cooking it within, say, a couple of days or maybe a week, obviously take the advice from your butcher as far as like how far along it is. But if you're not going to cook it sort of, in the short term, just chuck it in your freezer. There's no issues with freezing a brisket. I've cooked many frozen briskets, thawed them out, then cooked them, and yeah, it hasn't created any issues for me. All right, let's get to it. Right, so for equipment, you're going to want to have a nice sharp knife, of course. a bowl for your trimmings, a nice big board, the bigger the better. And of course, black gloves. All right, so firstly, let's have a bit of a look over it. Now that we've got it out of the bag, we can really see what we're dealing with here. One of the things that you can't see in the bag that happens quite often is this sort of thing, where you've got a big old flap of meat on the top. So this is the point muscle here, and this is that fat piece that runs underneath. Not really, not really much we can do about this section here, so we're gonna just take that off. But let's have a look over it first. There's that marbling we're talking about, looking fantastic, very happy with that. Just gonna get rid of that. Any sort of thin flappy sections you're gonna wanna get rid of. All right, so now that we know what we're dealing with, we're trying to make this about as aerodynamic as we possibly can. We don't want any sort of sharp edges, want it to be nice and round, nothing sort of sticking out, nothing thin, nothing that's gonna sort of go bad as we cook this. Any of those thin pieces or stick out pieces like this are just gonna be more susceptible to burning up, which will be no good. All right, so first cut I'll be making is just to get rid of this big old flap of meat here. Leaving that on isn't really gonna help. It's gonna sort of stiffen up and become a bit of a dorsal fin looking thing on it. So yeah, make sure you get rid of that. And don't you worry, we can use that beautiful meat for burgers later on. Maybe trim a little bit more off the top here actually. Just trying to flatten out this top section. So I'm gonna start trimming some of this fat away up here. I'm not gonna go too crazy with it. As mentioned before, this is point muscle on a 9+ Wagyu brisket. It doesn't need any help whatsoever to keep its fat content. It's got a beautiful amount of fat you can see through there. I can't wait to see how this one turns out. Just gonna come around the edge here and just round this off. All right, we've got rid of our big flappy dorsal fin there, got rid of a lot of the point fat cap. Now I'm gonna make a bit of a cut along this side just so we can sort of get to gauge where the flat and the point is. That's a really important part. So let's get that cut done there. Now in making that cut, you can see I've exposed this line here. This line represents the separation between the point muscle here and the flat muscle underneath. This brisket has a giant point on it. Wow, fantastic. Now, of course, as I mentioned, you don't want this to be pointy anywhere, so we're going to round off these corners. So you can just shave that corner off like that, and then just start to round it off a little. Just take little pieces off. Beautiful. And so this, you can see here, does taper out to a pretty thin flat section over here, so we're just going to sort of run a bit of a cut around here to sort of round this side off as well. It's really starting to take shape now. Around this side as well, there's a point section that's pointing out there. Just try and round off anything that's sticking out. All right, so just following that as our guiding line. So yeah, the point muscle on this brisket, so there's always a line where the point muscle terminates and you start to see the flat. So that's actually really far down on this brisket, which is good to see. So that line there is what we're talking about. It sort of thins out right there. So if you kind of give the point muscle a bit of a flex, you can sometimes kind of see it. Right, now of course another really important part is you want to have a shelf of about 6 to 10 mil, or about, as I say, about a 1/4 inch of fat cap on the top, so you can see it thickens a little bit here. Just gonna quickly score around there. Just taking some of the silver skin off here as well. Just gonna round this corner off again. I'm actually quite happy to leave that as is, I think. So I'm really happy with this brisket. It needs pretty minimal trimming overall, to be honest. The fat cap is actually looking pretty good on top already. It's got a nice sort of, it's got a nice thickness across the top, nice and even. And it's actually quite nice, soft, pillowy fat too. It's not the sort of hard stuff. You'll be able to sort of recognize that when you start trimming yourself. You'll see that there are hard parts to the brisket or hard white parts. That's the hard fat that's not really going to render out at all. You want to get rid of that. Yeah, I'm fine with that. So we've done our top side. Now let's have a look at our underside. There's a few sections under here that we're going to want to get into and fix. So just a flappy section of fat there that we're going to want to get rid of. This sort of flappy silver skin stuff, you can choose to get rid of that if you want. I wouldn't freak out too much about it. It's largely going to render out anyway, but we might take a bit of that off just to help us along. So one of the things that really helped me out with trimming early on is really knowing and understanding where the point and the flat muscle is. So you can see right the way around the brisket, we can identify where that line is. So if we go all the way around to here, back to here again, you can see where that thin line starts, all the way through to there. And then if you go to the underside, that's our line. That's our fault line right there. You can see it at this side as well. That's our line. And you can actually follow it around the whole brisket. So you see it's there. Has to go around there and thin out there. So we've got point muscle all the way to the end of this brisket almost. If you go in the reverse direction, we can see that's our fault line there. And then it starts to become visible again, just here, just there. And then it opens up to down there. And then follow it around. And there we have our separation of flat here, line of fat, and our point muscle where it starts to overlap over the edge. This might fool you into thinking that that's our line, but it's definitely not, because you can see by making that initial cut down the side of the brisket to sort of be able to map out where we're at, it's been able to allow me to identify exactly where that is. Just going to get rid of some of these sort of clumpy bits here. Anything that's like a little tag, you want to get rid of. Remember, cold meat and a sharp knife, perfect combination. So there are varying levels of aggression, I suppose you could say, when it comes to trimming briskets. You can be really aggressive and you know, trim absolutely every little tiny piece of fat off. You could be here for 2 hours doing that. I'm not really one of those kinds of people when I'm doing a home cook. Competition-wise, it's a bit different. My mate Justin from River X Barbecue, he runs the competition side of things for our briskets. And when he's doing a really aggressive competition trim, he'll find sort of the edge, you know, where the point meets, and he'll chop off a giant piece of this brisket. Like this Wagyu brisket would be something we'd probably use in a competition. It looks fantastic. We take off a giant strip of the flat just so we can make the slices the perfect size for the box. But we're not doing anything silly like that today. We're just going with a normal home cook. So we're going to flip it back over, make sure we're happy with our handiwork. Just look at us, see what sort of shape we might be looking at for when this brisket's done. So bear in mind, what's going to happen is this brisket's going to shrink up quite a bit. So yeah, you're going to find at the end you'll have a much smaller product. You know what? I am actually going to go a little further and make a last thing and just get this silver skin off the point here, because I want as much rub on meat as possible. I don't want to have big old lumps of silver skin, but the more rub that goes on meat, the more is going to develop a really, really nice bark, and that's what I'm looking for. All right, enough. I could be here all day if I keep staring at this. Just get rid of that little flap section there. All right, that's enough. Let's stop. Okay. For the rub side of things, just going to use a little splash of water. Just a splash, not much. Just to sort of hydrate the top of this brisket. And what that's going to do, that's going to allow our rub to stick nicely on there. Wow. You can see some of the fat's already melting. That's crazy. Wow. Now, rub of choice today is Go Full Texan by Lane's. Now, what I actually do with this is I actually kick up the pepper content in this, because this, according to the label, is 50-50. I like it to be more like 3 to 4 parts pepper to 1 part salt. You can dial in the pepper content as much as you want to, of course. There are places in Texas I've heard that do 9 parts pepper, but completely up to yourself. Run your own race with that. And let's get this one rubbed up. Do not forget the sides, of course. All right, just going to give that a bit of a press in. Magic. Now before we turn it over, we're going to mop up all of the pepper and salt from rubbing it down, put it onto the top, and flip it over. Same on top. Press it in, give it a nice little massage. It's going to have a long night in the smoker. Right, we're going to let this hang out on the cutting board for a bit while we get our smoker ready. Hope to see you in part 2.